Hi there, wonderful soul. Where are you joining us from today? Drop your city and country in the comments. Maybe it's a charming small town or a giant city skyline. And don't forget to share this video with friends and family to keep us growing. Let's get started. Russell Webb stood at the edge of his meticulously manicured property, his eyes fixed on the angular silhouette of the 5,000-square-foot modernist home he had not only imagined, but painstakingly realized. The structure's crisp geometry and imposing presence weren't mere aesthetic choices. They were an extension of Russell himself, structured, controlled, and unapologetically precise. At 43, he had taken apex architectural design from a fledgling idea to a leading name in Boston's competitive design landscape. Frost crunched softly beneath his boots as he moved along the perimeter, the mug in his hand sending tendrils of steam into the chill morning air. Within the house's pristine shell, his wife of 12 years, Natalie, lay asleep, or more likely, feigning sleep. He knew the difference by now. The signs had begun to surface 5 months prior. There were unexplained delays returning home. Mysterious new passcodes on her phone, the discreet tilt of her screen whenever she messaged someone, small evasions that pointed toward something far more serious. Russell often recalled his grandfather's patient voice during their quiet mornings fishing on Lake Champlain. "Feel the pull, then wait," the old man would say. At 35, Monica had mastered the art of masking sorrow with elegance, concealing the quiet bitterness gnawing at her core. "It was a team effort, sir," Brian said, his voice steady and firm with command. Instead, he set out to compile evidence. Natalie had been his anchor when all he had was raw talent and a relentless drive, back when they shared a tiny apartment and lived off midnight pizza while chasing big dreams. In those days, he believed she saw something in him. Her family had not. The idea of Dr. Philip Montgomery's daughter marrying a struggling draftsman from South Boston had been little more than a bad joke to them. Their disapproval was overt, laced into every holiday toast and dinner conversation. And as Apex climbed the ranks, Russell noticed a shift in Natalie. The woman who once snuck burgers into the studio during late-night design marathons now spent afternoons at spas with strangers whose names Russell couldn't place. The electricity they once shared had fizzled into something distant and ceremonial. His phone buzzed. A message from Doug Pearson, close friend, trusted legal counsel. "Everything's in place, just give the word." Russell typed back, "Thanksgiving. Let them all gather first." Doug's reply came immediately. Savage, but deserved. Slipping the phone away, Russell stepped back inside. In his study, he reached behind a framed architecture award and opened the concealed safe. From it, he pulled a leather dossier. Tucked inside were meticulously collected pieces of truth. Photos, statements, GPS data, receipts, and at the bottom, a single photograph. Natalie and Theodore Teddy Klein, her ex from college, locked in a familiar embrace outside the Brookline Hotel. Timestamp, 2:37 p.m. on a Tuesday. Natalie had claimed to be visiting her sister in Providence that day. Teddy had resurfaced 8 months earlier at a fundraiser. At the time, Russell had thought nothing of it, just another smooth-talking surgeon in her father's orbit. But once he started digging, the truth unraveled fast. He secured the folder just as Natalie's footsteps echoed on the stairs. "You're up early?" she said lightly, cinching her silk robe. Her hair was effortlessly perfect, her smile practiced. "Deadline's coming up," Russell murmured, brushing her cheek with a kiss. Her perfume was opulent and false. "Don't forget," she called over her shoulder. "Thanksgiving's at Dad's this year. The Kleins will be there. Perfect, right? You and Teddy got along at the gala." He met her gaze without flinching. "Wouldn't miss it." As she disappeared into the kitchen, Russell placed a call to his brother, Scott, his last real family. "It's in motion," he said quietly. "Thanksgiving." "You sure?" Scott asked. "No turning back once it starts." "They crossed the line," Russell replied. "Now I erase it." Returning to his drafting table, Russell didn't sketch out blueprints for a building. What took shape now was far more exacting, a step-by-step design to dismantle everything Natalie had constructed on a foundation of deceit. The Montgomery home towered over Beacon Hill, a beacon of old-money elegance draped in colonial splendor. 3 Sundays before Thanksgiving, Russell eased his Tesla between a line of luxury vehicles, adjusted the cuffs of his tailored coat, and stepped onto the cobblestone drive. These family dinners had long since become theater, everyone playing a role while resentment simmered just below the surface. Inside, Dr. Philip Montgomery held court in his study, swirling a glass of scotch and captivating his audience with tales of scalpel triumphs and hard-won accolades. Teddy Klein blended into the gathering, his laughter booming a little too eagerly as he clung to every one of Philip's quips. "Russell," Phillips barked, his voice both sharp and hollow. "Grab a drink." "Bourbon." "Desperately," Russell replied coolly, his gaze slipping past him to where Natalie had edged subtly closer to Teddy. A diamond bracelet glittered under the chandelier, clearly a recent addition, and certainly not his gift. Beverly, Phillips's wife, appeared just then, handing Russell a glass. "Natalie mentioned you've been spending long nights at work," she said, voice touched with pointed curiosity. "That Danforth Tower must be keeping you busy," Russell offered a polished smile. "That project wrapped up weeks ago. Lately, I've shifted focus to more personal ventures." He noticed the momentary tension flicker across Natalie's face, quickly hidden behind a sip of wine and a tight-lipped smile. Dinner unfolded as expected, thinly veiled barbs wrapped in polished etiquette. Phillips rambled about hedge funds and profit margins, Beverly lamented the odd habits of the new neighbors, and Natalie's sister Olivia passed around pristine vacation shots from Prague and Venice. "So, Russell," Phillips drawled as he swirled his wine, "anything new coming out of your charming little firm? A garden shed, perhaps? Or maybe a luxury doghouse?" Laughter rang out, crisp and rehearsed. 12 years of this, Russell thought. Each joke expertly designed to remind him of his supposed place. "Actually," he said evenly, "we just secured the Franklin Medical Center expansion." The chuckles died out. Phillips coughed into his glass. "That's my hospital," he said, eyes narrowing. "Exactly," Russell confirmed. "Your board approved my proposal unanimously last week." What he didn't add? He had underbid his rivals and called in long-standing favors from board members whose houses bore his architectural touch. It wasn't a lucrative deal, but strategically, it was invaluable. Because architecture wasn't just glass and steel, it was tension, groundwork, and leverage. After dinner, Russell excused himself, ostensibly to find the restroom, but instead slipped into Phillips's private study. He knew the location of the safe, concealed behind a predictable hunting print. He input the code he had quietly memorized months ago. Inside, he snapped quick photos of selected documents, then restored everything with exacting care. On his way back to the others, he passed Natalie and Teddy standing uncomfortably close in the hallway. Their voices were low, their posture intimate. They sprang apart as he approached. "Russell!" Teddy beamed too brightly. "Natalie was just telling me about your trip to Bora Bora. Sounds incredible." "It was," Russell replied smoothly. "She has a fondness for tropical getaways, though even paradise casts a shadow now and then." Later, they left in separate cars, Natalie citing a headache and the need for fresh air. Alone in his vehicle, Russell made a call. "Doug," he said, "file the papers first thing tomorrow, and have the penthouse ready by Wednesday." "That soon?" Doug asked. "What about the house?" "It's settled. All assets are moved. The snare's nearly in place." Russell hung up and glanced in the mirror. Natalie's car followed steadily. She was on the phone, grinning, animated, almost certainly speaking to Teddy. Russell knew the play. They'd keep up appearances through Thanksgiving. Then Natalie would initiate the divorce, assuming she'd walk off with the house and half the assets. She and Teddy would start fresh, but Russell had spent months preparing. While Natalie assumed he was buried in blueprints and deadlines, he had quietly rewritten their future. The house? No longer under joint ownership. A signed document, one Natalie hadn't bothered to read, assuming it was business-related, had transferred the title solely to him. His firm, safely housed within a trust she couldn't touch. Liquid assets, moved to carefully concealed accounts. And he had proof, a mountain of it, of her betrayal, her planning, the lies delivered with practiced sweetness. In Massachusetts, prenups were vulnerable, but hard evidence of infidelity, that could break through any negotiation. As he pulled into the driveway, a message flashed on his phone. It was from his investigator. Meeting confirmed. 3 p.m., Brookline Hotel, room 412. Russell's smile was faint and measured. Natalie and Teddy had grown reckless under the illusion of safety. Tomorrow, while they believed him to be away on business in New York, he'd gather the final pieces. That night, he played the attentive husband while Natalie chattered about holiday plans. "Meredith's bringing her apple pie," she said. "Teddy swears it beats his mom's." She glanced up, expecting a reaction. "Can't wait," Russell replied casually. Her expression flickered, just slightly. He kissed her goodnight, lips brushing across her deception, then closed his eyes and envisioned the moment her illusion would come apart. 2 days before Thanksgiving, seated in a quiet booth at Winston's Steakhouse, Russell met with Doug. Legal documents lay neatly arranged between them. "It's all in order," Doug said, sliding over a thick folder. "Judge approved it this morning. Sheriff Dawson's on standby for Thursday." Russell opened the folder, scanning the pages inside. After 12 years of marriage, it took less than 30 days for nearly every bond between Russell and Natalie to unravel. Though the final court ruling hadn't been issued yet, the emergency injunction now in his hands gave Russell the leverage to finally act. "You really want to drop this on them now?" Doug asked, slicing into his steak. "Thanksgiving, with her entire clan there. Brutal move." Russell gave his glass of red wine a slow swirl before answering. "They've treated me like a stranger for years. Philip once told me I wasn't fit to draw up plans for a kennel. When things between Natalie and I started falling apart, they didn't lift a finger. If anything, they nudged her toward leaving." He placed the glass on the table with a soft clink, his voice turning cold. "Now that I've built something they can't ignore, they smile to my face and undermine me behind closed doors. And Natalie?" His jaw tightened. "She's been quietly draining our accounts. Almost 300,000. She and Teddy already signed papers on a condo in Back Bay. Her ambush was set for right after the holidays," Doug said with a slow shake of his head. "How do you even catch wind of all this?" "My business is built on identifying structural vulnerabilities, figuring out where the cracks are before things collapse." Russell's voice was level. "I applied the same method to my marriage." What he didn't admit was how he'd followed Natalie one evening to Teddy's office, remaining parked outside while their laughter spilled through the walls. He had stood in the cold, listening to their future plans, how Russell's pride would stop him from claiming alimony in a state where assets are split evenly. They even joked about which of his clients they could quietly poach once the ink was dry. "There's more," Russell added, unlocking his phone and sliding it across the table to Doug. Doug scrolled, his expression shifting from curious to stunned. "Christ, Russell. These came from Philip's private safe? Is this even legal?" "He's been steering patients at his hospital toward specialists who pay him under the table, Teddy included. It's all documented. Names, dates, amounts. I've already sent copies to the hospital's board and to the state's medical ethics committee. They'll receive them first thing Friday." Doug leaned back, shaking his head. "You're not just walking away," he murmured. "You're turning the whole thing to rubble." "They thought I'd just let it go," Russell replied. "That I'd keep quiet when Natalie left, too worried about my image to fight back." They were wrong. That night, When Russell walked into the house, he found Natalie at the foot of the stairs, zipping up a small suitcase. "Heading out?" he asked, voice calm. She flinched slightly. "Just grabbing a few things. Going to my parents tomorrow. Dad wants help getting everything ready for Thanksgiving." She paused, trying to sound offhand. "You'll be there around 1, right?" "Wouldn't miss it," Russell answered, his tone practiced. Later, as they lay silently in bed, Russell stared at the ceiling while memories drifted through his mind. The early nights when she'd fall asleep beside him as he worked on blueprints. Their rooftop champagne toast after he landed his first major contract. At one point, he had truly loved her. The next morning was a flurry of bags and coats and brief goodbyes. Russell kissed her gently before she left, the gesture tender and believable. "I love you," he said, for the last time, directed at the person she used to be. "Love you too," she replied absently, already gone in every way that mattered. Once the door shut behind her, Russell walked slowly through the house, taking in the remnants of their life together. In his study, he opened the safe and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was her grandmother's ring, the heirloom she had claimed went missing the year before. He had found it buried in her jewelry drawer, evidently too sentimental for her to wear while betraying its significance. He slipped the ring into an envelope with a note that read, "Some things should stay in the family." Then he packed a single suitcase and stood quietly, absorbing the home he had so carefully crafted, now transformed into the launch pad for his quiet war. By the next day, everything would change. The intricate web of lies Natalie had spun would unravel under the pressure of precisely delivered truth. The downfall was not spontaneous. It had been engineered with care, timed to maximum effect. His phone buzzed. "Scott." "It's all in place," Russell confirmed. "You're sure?" Scott asked. "Not just about ending the marriage, but about going nuclear?" Russell thought of Philip's smirks, Natalie's betrayal, Teddy's smug ambition, and the years of subtle disdain he had tolerated. "Some systems can't be salvaged," he said quietly. "You have to tear them down before you can build something real." Thanksgiving morning arrived crisp and clear. In the mirror of his hotel suite, Russell adjusted his tie. His reflection was calm, unreadable. From the penthouse of the Thomas Grande Hotel, he looked out over Boston Harbor. It was a fitting vantage point from which to begin the final phase. His phone vibrated. A message from Scott. Everyone had arrived by now. Philip was there, along with Beverly, Olivia, and her husband, and of course, Teddy and his wife Meredith. But Natalie looked on edge, clearly unsettled. Russell had made sure Scott got there early, not to assist with preparations, as he'd claimed, but to confirm who had shown up, and to discreetly install the audio recorders Russell had handed him beforehand. "En route," Russell had replied to Scott's earlier message. "Stay close to Meredith," he'd instructed. "She's going to need someone when it all unfolds." Meredith Klein, unwitting collateral in a much bigger confrontation. Russell had briefly considered giving her a heads up, but ultimately decided against it. Watching her discover the truth in real time would maximize the effect. Right on schedule, Russell's phone vibrated. It was Doug, calling as planned. "Sheriff Dawson's nearby," Doug confirmed. "He's just waiting for your signal to bring in the paperwork. Everything else is squared away. Accounts frozen, credentials changed, new locks at the office installed. What about the residence?" "That's been handled too," Doug said. "The locksmith finished about an hour ago. The new security system's active. Movers arrive tomorrow morning at 9. Russell ended the call and glanced at his reflection in the hallway mirror. He adjusted his dark crimson tie, the one Natalie always said made him look sharp, and stepped outside. It took under 30 minutes to get to Beacon Hill. Russell pulled up directly in front of the Montgomery home, ignoring the designated parking spots further down the street. He wasn't planning a long visit. Scott greeted him at the door, anxiety all over his face. "She's already asked about you, twice," he muttered, gesturing toward the dining room. The house was steeped in nostalgia. Roast turkey, spiced cranberries, and Beverly's signature herb stuffing filled the air. Russell paused in the entryway, the sound of cheerful conversation echoing faintly down the hall. He glanced at his watch. 1:17 p.m. Everything was in place. As he entered the room, the talking stopped instantly. 8 heads turned his way, some startled, others wary. "There he is!" Philip called out with forced enthusiasm. "We thought you might have ditched the whole thing." Natalie greeted him with a brittle smile. "Right on time, love. We're just about to start carving." Russell took in the carefully composed scene. The chandelier lit the crystal brilliantly. Every piece of silverware gleamed. The vintage china, brought out only for the most distinguished occasions, was immaculately laid out. It was beautiful and utterly phony. "I won't be staying," Russell said coolly. Beverly looked confused. "But Natalie made your favorite cranberry relish," she said. Russell didn't look at her. His focus was squarely on Teddy, who was suddenly fixated on the contents of his wine glass. Meredith shifted awkwardly, sensing the sudden tension. "I'm here for one reason," Russell said. "Natalie, your things have been packed. You have until noon tomorrow to collect them. After that, whatever's left will be donated." Silence took hold of the room. Natalie's complexion went pale. "What are you saying?" she asked, her voice unsteady. "You already know," Russell replied. "Room 412 at the Brookline Hotel, every Tuesday afternoon, for half a year. Just happens to be halfway between my office and Teddy's clinic. Quite convenient." Meredith gasped. Teddy tried to say something, anything, but Russell's ice-cold stare silenced him before he could begin. Philip stood up abruptly. "Now look here." "Sit down, Philip," Russell cut in. "The investigation into your actions starts Monday. The board's been briefed. Medical kickbacks leave a very distinct trail." Philip slumped back into his chair, his face ghostly. Natalie's voice cracked as rage overtook her. "You can't just throw me out. That house is half mine." A flicker of amusement touched Russell's face. "Actually, no, it's not. You remember those business forms you hurried through last year? You signed your portion over to me, probably in too much of a rush to meet Teddy to bother reading the fine print." Natalie looked like she'd been struck. "And your finances?" Russell added. "I kept meticulous records, tracking every cent that was yours and mine, including the ones you stashed in that hidden account. The bank has already flagged those as unauthorized transactions." Her voice dropped, low and venomous. "You're a bastard." "Thanksgiving seems a fitting time, don't you think?" Russell replied without emotion. She gestured vaguely toward the kitchen. "Your dinner plate's out in the trash with the rest of the garbage," she snapped. "You make me sick." Even her father spoke. "You should have left him a long time ago," he muttered. Russell stood, exposed in front of the family, yet perfectly composed. Then, as if on cue, his phone rang, loudly, echoing through the heavy silence. His attorney was calling, on speaker. "The court order has been finalized," he said with clinical detachment. "She has 24 hours to vacate my home." The wine glass slipped from Natalie's hand and shattered against the hardwood, its crisp break echoing in the stunned silence. Around the table her family remained frozen, as though the air itself had turned to glass. Russell delivered the blow without a hint of satisfaction, his gaze steady as their confusion gave way to dawning comprehension, and then dread. "This was your grand finale, wasn't it?" he asked, voice smooth. "One last humiliation to stage in front of everyone, followed by the divorce announcement." His eyes moved to Teddy. "And you were going to propose over dessert, weren't you? A festive little memory to cap the evening." At the very moment Natalie dropped her glass, Russell's phone lit up with an incoming call. He tapped it and put it on speaker. "Doug?" "It's done," Doug confirmed. "The judge has approved everything. She must leave the premises within 24 hours and surrender all property access, keys, codes, everything. And Sheriff Dawson is ready when you are. Russell's reply was immediate. Send him in. Right on cue, the doorbell rang. Scott stood, vanished into the hall, and came back leading Sheriff Dawson. The tension in the dining room had grown unbearable. The sheriff looked as though he'd been thrown into a volatile situation with no escape. Mrs. Winters? He asked, stepping toward Natalie. I've been instructed to deliver these court documents to you. He placed the sealed envelope in front of her, gave the room a brief, uncomfortable glance, and retreated as quickly as he'd come. Russell turned to leave but paused just before exiting. From his inside jacket pocket, he withdrew a small envelope and laid it on the buffet table. It's your grandmother's ring, he said quietly. The one you thought you lost. Some things still belong in the family. And with that, he walked out, the sound of the door closing muffled by Natalie's broken sobs and the rising commotion behind him. Descending the front steps, Russell heard Meredith's voice rising in fury, Philip trying to restore order, and Teddy scrambling for explanations. He slid behind the wheel of his car and drove back to the hotel. In less than 10 minutes, the remnants of his former life had fallen away. Now, from those ashes, he would rebuild. 3 days post-Thanksgiving, Russell sat in his office at Apex Architectural Design, reviewing the aftermath like a general surveying a battlefield. Philip Montgomery had been suspended while a formal inquiry unfolded. Early signs pointed toward permanent professional damage, including the likely loss of his medical license. The scandal had already made headlines in the Boston Globe, but Russell's identity had been carefully protected, thanks to the anonymous tip he himself had submitted. Teddy Klein's dental clinic was hemorrhaging clients. The medical board had opened a separate investigation into his part in Philip's illicit referral scheme. Meredith, meanwhile, had filed for divorce and retained one of the city's most ruthless attorneys. As for Natalie, Russell opened a fresh report from his private investigator. She was currently staying with her sister, Olivia. She had attempted to tap into a hidden bank account, but Russell's legal team had already flagged it for unauthorized access and had it frozen. All her credit cards, extensions of his, had been canceled. She had consulted 3 divorce attorneys, only to be turned away each time. Russell had seen to it that every major firm in Boston was compromised, either by existing relationships or by receiving significant holiday donations just days earlier. A knock interrupted his train of thought. Veronica, his assistant, stepped in with a coffee. Miss Montgomery is in the lobby again, she said pointedly, honoring his request to refer to Natalie by her maiden name. Would you like me to alert security? No need, Russell replied. Let her know I'm in a meeting that may run long. She's welcome to wait. Since Thanksgiving, Natalie had shown up daily, alternating between tearful pleas and furious demands. Each time, he refused to see her. There's more, Veronica added. Mr. Klein has called again, says it's urgent. Block his number, Russell said without looking up, and have it double-check the firewall on our client directory. He's been reaching out to our contacts. His phone buzzed. A message from Scott. She's at the storage unit now. Movers are from Montgomery Dental. Exactly as Russell had anticipated. The unit contained her personal and seasonal belongings. He had ensured it was packed up and left accessible, both to comply with court directives and to monitor her steps. The Berlin team's waiting in Conference A, Veronica reminded him. Russell gathered his documents and stood. Business, like time, moved forward. His firm had just landed a coveted international development contract in Germany, helped along by the unexpected withdrawal of Westfield Design. The owner? Philip Montgomery's brother-in-law. Russell had arranged the chain of events carefully, ensuring that the connection remained invisible while the impact was undeniable. As he stepped into the conference room and began presenting the firm's design proposals, his phone buzzed repeatedly in his pocket. As the meeting concluded, he glanced at his phone to see who had tried reaching him. Missed calls from Natalie, Teddy, and, surprisingly, Beverly Montgomery. He played Beverly's voicemail, feeling a chill of vindication rise in his chest. "Russell, please," she began, her voice unsteady. "Philip suffered a minor heart attack. The pressure is too much for him," she continued. "The doctors are optimistic, but this whole inquiry is breaking him. If you can't do it for him, think of Natalie. Surely there's something you can do." Without a second thought, Russell deleted the message. The memory of Beverly's scorn still lingered, how she had subtly undermined him during the early days of his relationship with Natalie. Her polished cruelty, her quiet insinuations that Natalie belonged with someone of greater status, hadn't been forgotten. He vividly recalled that second Christmas together, when Beverly handed Natalie a business card for a dating service, right in front of him. She had smiled sweetly and said, "Just in case, darling, if things don't pan out." And now she dared ask him for mercy? Russell had none to spare. The intercom on his desk lit up. "Mr. Webb, Sheriff Dawson is here." Russell's brow creased. That was unexpected. "Send him in," he said. The sheriff entered, clearly feeling awkward among the sleek furnishings of Russell's modern office. "Mr. Webb," he said, "I thought you should know. Your ex-wife and Dr. Klein attempted to enter your property this morning. The new security system stopped them, but they smashed a window to try getting inside. A neighbor called it in." "Were they taken into custody?" Russell asked, voice calm. "No, sir. By the time we arrived, they were already gone, but your security footage captured everything." "You may want to hang on to it for legal purposes," Dawson added. Russell gave a short nod. "Thank you, Sheriff. I appreciate it." After the sheriff left, Russell dialed Doug's number. "They broke into the house. I want restraining orders filed, on both of them." "Use the surveillance clips," Doug replied. "Oh, and the judge threw out Natalie's emergency support request. We presented her undisclosed account. Her claim of financial desperation didn't hold up." Later that afternoon, Russell stopped by the house, not to move back in, but to examine the damage. The broken window had already been repaired by the security company. The interior was silent, almost hollow. He walked through the familiar rooms, recalling the day he had carried Natalie across the threshold, both of them breathless with laughter. His phone rang again, an unknown number. He answered. "Russell Webb." "You destroyed everything," Teddy's voice came through, slurred and bitter. "My career, my marriage, my reputation." "You did that yourself," Russell said flatly, "the moment you crossed the line with my wife." "It wasn't just an intimate relationship," Teddy cut him off. "We love each other. We've loved each other for years. She only stayed with you for the money. And now what? She's got nothing." "She made her decision," Russell said, then hung up. In the master bedroom, a closet door stood ajar. Hanging inside was a red silk dress, one he had bought Natalie for their 10th anniversary. He pulled it off the hanger and took it to the kitchen. He opened the trash compactor, shoved the dress in, hit the button, and watched it crumple into a crushed heap. A text buzzed in. It was from Scott. "They're at Harrington's. Both look wrecked. Want me to get closer?" Russell typed back, "No need. Knowing they're miserable is enough." He walked out of the house and headed to the hotel where he'd been staying. Movers were scheduled for the next day to pack what little remained. The house would be listed the following week, priced aggressively to ensure a quick sale. He didn't care about the loss. The place was drenched in memories he no longer wanted. Back in his suite, his phone rang once more. Another unfamiliar number. This time, he answered. "What is it?" he asked, his voice devoid of emotion. I need to understand," Natalie sobbed. "How could you do this? To my dad? To all of us?" "The same way you planned to do it to me," Russell replied. "Only difference, I finished the job." "I made a huge mistake," she choked out. "But 12 years, Russell. Doesn't that mean anything to you?" "It meant everything," he said softly. "Until you threw it away." He ended the call and blocked the number. Then he crossed the room to the window and looked out over the glowing city skyline. Somewhere out there, Natalie and Teddy were drinking to dull their regrets. Their dreams of a serene future had collapsed. Philip was stuck in a hospital bed, his career in shambles. Beverly, in a frantic effort, reached out to their powerful contacts, but the same people they once counted on now kept their distance as the scandal spread. Russell didn't feel joy in their downfall, but he wasn't burdened by guilt either. They had underestimated his worth, dismissed his presence, and intended to discard him. Now, they were paying the price. His phone vibrated. Doug was calling. "You didn't tell me you were listing the house," his lawyer said curtly. "Made the call this morning," Russell replied. "You could wait it out and get a higher offer," Doug suggested. Russell answered flatly, "It's not about the money. I want it behind me." He ended the call and turned back to his laptop, diving into blueprints for a new residential project. This one for himself. It would be modest compared to his previous homes, but deliberate in design. A personal space crafted without compromise, untouched by outside expectations. A sanctuary immune to betrayal. Roughly a month after Thanksgiving, Russell stood inside his temporary Manhattan office, watching flakes of snow float down over Central Park. He had taken a consulting position at a leading architecture firm, partly to create distance from Boston during the divorce, but mainly to lose himself in work while the dust settled. His phone buzzed with a new message from Doug. Divorce finalized. Montgomery's attorney tried to claim coercion and fraud. Judge threw it out. It's done. Russell's reaction was layered. Relief, a quiet sense of victory, and an odd hollowness he hadn't expected. 12 years of marriage dissolved with a single ruling. He typed back, "Any trouble with the financials?" Doug replied, "None. She gets exactly what the prenup specified, minus penalties related to the affair. It comes out to about 1.2% of your assets." "She's filing an appeal," Doug added, "but it doesn't have legs." Russell placed the phone down and returned to his sketches. As anticipated, the Boston home had sold in days. His project in Berlin was progressing smoothly. The Boston office continued to operate efficiently under his second-in-command. By all appearances, his life was aligning perfectly. Yet something beneath the surface felt unresolved, a persistent note of incompletion. A knock at the door. His assistant peeked in. "Mr. Webb, there's someone asking to see you. Olivia Carson. She says she's your former sister-in-law." Russell's expression cooled. "Send her in." Olivia entered with hesitation. She looked thinner, more worn down than the last time he'd seen her. The polished woman who once sneered at his humble background was gone. "Thank you for agreeing to see me," she said, ignoring the chair he motioned toward. "I'll keep this brief." "What do you want, Olivia?" he asked, guarded. "It's about Natalie," she said after a moment. "She's falling apart. She's drinking heavily, not eating. Lost her job last week." Russell didn't flinch. "That's no longer my concern." "She still loves you," Olivia continued. "What happened with Teddy? She knows it was a terrible lapse in judgment. But should she have to lose everything because of it?" Russell studied Olivia closely, looking for falsehood. But he found no deception, only earnest worry. "And Teddy?" he asked. "Weren't they inseparable?" Olivia's jaw tightened. "He left weeks ago. After his license got revoked, he skipped town. Turns out, their fairy tale romance didn't survive real pressure." A sardonic smile tugged at Russell's lips. Teddy had vanished at the first sign of trouble. Men like that always did. "Still not my issue," Russell said. "Natalie made her bed." Olivia paused. "And my father? Was he part of your retaliation too?" Russell's tone remained even. "Your father made his fortune on corruption and backroom deals. I just exposed the truth. The consequences were already built in." "He'll never practice law again," Olivia said quietly. 30 years of service, erased because his daughter made a poor choice. "No," Russell replied firmly. "Erased because he broke the law. Don't confuse justice with revenge, Olivia. She looked at him for a long moment. You're not the man I thought you were. None of us are, he replied. That's the whole lesson, isn't it? After she left, Russell canceled his remaining appointments and wandered alone through the snowy paths of Central Park. Her words echoed in his mind. Had he gone too far? Had his quest for justice slowly turned into something else entirely? Absolutely not, Russell told himself with resolve. The Montgomery family was merely harvesting the consequences of the seeds they had willingly planted. Whatever misdeeds Philip had committed had no bearing on Russell's failed marriage. Natalie's collapse was the natural result of her own decisions, and Teddy abandoning her only confirmed what Russell had suspected all along. His phone rang. It was Scott, calling from Boston. Just checking in, his brother said. Doug mentioned the divorce went through. It's official, Russell confirmed. A pause followed before Scott asked, How do you feel about it? Russell paused to gather his thoughts. Justified, he said at last, but it still feels unfinished. What else is there? Scott asked, wary. Beverly, Russell replied. She's remained untouched. Scott sighed. Jesus, Russell, haven't you done enough? Philip's career is finished. Natalie's a wreck. What more are you after? Russell had asked himself that very question dozens of times. The swift thrill of his Thanksgiving revenge had come and gone, leaving behind only a hollow space. Each fresh blow dealt to the Montgomerys gave him a fleeting sense of satisfaction, but it never lasted. I want them to truly see it, he finally said. Really understand what they did, not just to me, to everyone around them. Their entitlement, their self-importance, it poisoned everything. And targeting Beverly is going to make that clear? Scott asked, pressing. Russell didn't answer right away. Beverly Montgomery had always been the tactician, the one behind the curtain. She shaped their image, protected their reputation, maneuvered the family like chess pieces. She had nudged Natalie toward Teddy during college, and later encouraged her to date Russell when his prospects were on the rise. That conveniently timed reunion with Teddy at last year's gala, that had Beverly's fingerprints all over it. Maybe it won't change anything, Russell said eventually. Maybe nothing will. That evening, an email from Beverly appeared in his inbox. The subject line read, "Please read." His finger hovered over the delete key, but curiosity made him click. Russell, I'm not here to ask for forgiveness, just to offer some clarity. You always felt we looked down on you from the beginning. You weren't wrong. Philip and I were raised in a world where pedigree trumped talent. We passed those values on to our daughters. So when Natalie brought you home, smart, driven, but from South Boston with no name behind you, we couldn't see who you were, only who you weren't. That doesn't excuse Natalie's choices, or how we treated you. But perhaps it gives you some context. We taught her that appearances mattered more than principles, and she listened. Now our family is in ruins. Philip's reputation is irreparable. Our friends have vanished. Natalie is unrecognizable. You've succeeded. You've dismantled everything. If that gives you peace, then you deserve it. But if you're still empty, remember this. Even justified destruction rarely brings healing to the one who carries it out. Beverly Montgomery Russell read the email 3 times. Each reading fanned his fury. Even now, Beverly was spinning her version of events, casting herself as the reflective matriarch while subtly implying that Russell's vengeance had done more harm to him than to them. He closed the email and deleted it without responding. Then he poured himself a scotch. Halfway through the drink, his phone buzzed again. A message from Scott. Saw Natalie across from your old office. She looked terrible. Security wouldn't let her in, so she just sat there for hours. In the cold. Is this really what you wanted? Russell set the glass down and stepped over to the window. The city stretched before him, a maze of glowing lights and intersecting stories. In Boston, Natalie sat alone in the cold. Philip was likely bedridden in a hospital, disgraced. Beverly, undoubtedly, was already drafting another calculated message to salvage what remained of their image. He had won. Completely. Decisively. So why did it feel so hollow? Russell picked up his phone and began composing an email to his real estate agent in Boston. He needed to accelerate the move. There was no future for him amid this wreckage. Only ghosts. He needed distance, a reset, something clean and untainted by all that had happened. As for the Montgomerys, they had forged their own downfall. Their world hadn't been destroyed by outside forces. It had crumbled from within, the predictable collapse of a structure built on vanity, denial, and weakness. 6 months later, Russell stood atop the Willis Tower in Chicago, taking in the vast skyline of his new city, the city that would now carry his future. From his vantage point, the streets below unfolded in perfect alignment, precise, orderly, and a far cry from the disarrayed maze of Boston. A vibration in his pocket pulled him from the view. His real estate agent in Chicago had sent a message. The documents for the South Loop project were finalized. They'd scheduled the walkthrough for 10 the next morning. Russell had recently purchased a historic industrial building that he planned to convert into both his residence and the headquarters for his new architectural firm. The restoration would demand everything from him: time, focus, imagination. It was the exact kind of undertaking he'd been craving. Another message appeared. Doug checking in from Boston, as predictably as ever. Philip had taken a plea deal, a 1.5 years of probation, permanent loss of his medical credentials, and a $2 million fine. Beverly was putting the Beacon Hill house on the market. Natalie had taken a front desk job at Montgomery Dental. Russell's response was muted. No bitterness, no sense of victory. Any desire for retribution had long since faded into exhaustion. The Montgomerys were no longer central to his story. They were footnotes to a chapter long closed. 3 months earlier, Webb Design Group had launched in Chicago. He'd assembled a trusted crew from Boston and handed over the original company to fresh leadership, transferring most of the shares to his former employees through a generous equity program. The move had earned their loyalty and given him the fresh start he'd needed. As he stepped onto the sidewalk, his phone rang. It was his brother, Scott, calling from the East Coast. "Congrats on the new space," Scott said. "When do I get the full tour of this warehouse wonderland?" "When it's more than scaffolding and pipe dreams," Russell answered. "Right now it's barely a skeleton." "Well, on the subject of dreams," Scott said with a hint of hesitation, "I had coffee with Meredith Klein yesterday." Russell halted mid-stride. "Teddy's ex-wife?" "Yeah. She's putting their place on the market and needed a realtor." Scott, who had transitioned from finance to real estate 2 years back, sounded cautious. "She asked about you." "What did she say exactly?" Russell's tone sharpened. "She wanted to know how you've been, if you're seeing anyone. She's fully divorced now." "I know," Russell replied coolly. "The papers went through a while ago." "She's the real deal, Russ. Intelligent, genuine, nothing like him." "You can stop there," Russell said, cutting him off. "I'm not interested, especially not in anyone from that mess." "It's been 6 months," Scott said softly. "She's not Natalie." "This isn't about Natalie," Russell shot back, then paused, collecting himself. "Sorry, I've just got a lot on my plate with the new office and the renovation. Dating isn't a priority." After hanging up, Russell acknowledged, at least to himself, that his response had been overly sharp. The truth was, Natalie's betrayal had left a scar deeper than he'd allowed himself to admit. Trust had become a fragile thing, nearly unreachable. That evening, he remained late at his temporary Chicago workspace, poring over blueprints and design notes for the building. Near midnight, his phone lit up with a call from an unknown Boston number. He hesitated, then answered. "Russell." The voice on the other end was unsteady, frail. "Please don't hang up," Natalie said. He stayed silent, but didn't end the call. "I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from," she continued. "I'm not calling to ask for anything. I just, I wanted to tell you I'm sorry, genuinely sorry. There's no excuse for how I treated you. Memories of their time together surfaced, unwelcome and vivid. I'm in therapy now, she added, her voice cracking, trying to figure out why I destroyed something that mattered so much. She paused, as if gathering strength. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just needed you to know. I finally understand what I lost. What I threw away. When Russell responded, his voice was even and cold. Is that all? Yes, she whispered. Except, I hope you find happiness, Russell. You deserve it. The call ended, and Russell remained still, staring at the dark screen of his phone. A part of him wanted to call her back, not out of kindness, but to demand answers that still haunted him. Had she ever truly loved him? Was their relationship genuine, or had it always been a lie? But he knew no explanation could fill that void. Some questions were better left unanswered. The next morning, he met with his contractor at the South Loop site. They walked the interior of the vast structure, pointing out beams, partitions, and the outline of what was to come. With each step, the future became more tangible. A new chapter had begun. The ground level was set to become the focal point of Web Design Group's new headquarters, a sleek, open-concept studio awash in natural light, crafted to foster clarity and connection. Above it, the upper floors were being redesigned into Russell's private home, not lavish like the Boston estate, but calm, deliberate, and suited for a quieter way of living. We can retain a good portion of the original brickwork, the contractor said, scanning the structure, but the support beams will need strengthening. Do it, Russell replied, giving a brief nod. I want to honor this building's past, but shape it into something ready for what's ahead. As he walked through the space, mentally mapping out the future, a new email buzzed his phone. The sender's name stopped him, Beverly Montgomery. His first thought was to delete it outright, but a hesitation crept in. Russell, we've finalized the sale of the Beacon Hill house. While going through Philip's study, I found these. They belong to you, not us. Beverly attached were photos of architectural drawings, his first design concepts, sketched years ago, the same ones he had shown Natalie at the very beginning of their relationship. He had thought them lost forever. Staring at them, he was pulled back to that night in his tiny apartment, cheap wine on the table, nerves and excitement battling within him. Natalie had understood immediately. She'd not only seen the idea, she'd improved it. That moment had changed him. It was one of the reasons he had fallen for her. She hadn't just accepted his dream, she had shaped it with him. He closed the email in silence and turned back toward the contractor, still awaiting direction. Russell gestured to a bricked-off section of wall. Let's remove that one, he said. I want to see what's behind it. As the day wore on, Russell found himself making calls with unusual clarity. It felt as if the building itself was speaking to him, a rare feeling, one he hadn't experienced since the collapse of his marriage. The structure's quiet strength stirred something dormant in him. The builder, not the survivor. That evening, back in his hotel suite, another email came through. This time, it was from Scott. Found something in the old storage unit you may want. Your graduation project. The community center model that won the university prize is still intact. Should I ship it to Chicago? Russell's lips curved into a faint smile. Yes. It belongs in the new space. While getting ready for bed, his phone rang again. Doug, his attorney, was on the other end. Apologies for the late call, Doug began, but I thought this was best coming from me. Philip Montgomery passed away tonight. Heart attack. Beverly asked that you be informed. Russell sat down heavily on the edge of the bed. Philip, his former father-in-law, constant critic and relentless adversary, was gone. The man who had undermined him at every turn, who had fanned the worst parts of Natalie's nature, who had refused to acknowledge his work or worth. You still there? Doug asked. I'm here, Russell replied, voice steady but low. Thanks for telling me. Will you attend the funeral? Doug asked, careful with the question. No, Russell said immediately. That chapter is closed. He ended the call and walked over to the window. Chicago glowed beneath him, a city alive in the night. He'd imagined that news of Philip's death might bring some sense of triumph. But instead he felt hollow, emptied out, not victorious. In that moment, Russell understood something profound. Revenge, even fulfilled, couldn't fix the fractures inside. Only creation could do that. He returned to the desk and opened his laptop. The renovation plans filled the screen. He dove into them with renewed purpose, editing, adjusting, refining, until the design reached beyond function and touched something more permanent. As dawn approached, he finally closed the lid and went to sleep, deeply and peacefully. That night, in his dreams, he wandered through the completed space, not alone, but surrounded by a team, their laughter echoing through bright corridors, full of promise. 18 months later, Russell stood in the center of his realized vision, the Chicago headquarters of Web Design Group. Staff moved around him, setting up desks and arranging final details ahead of the grand opening. What had once been a derelict warehouse was now a celebrated architectural gem, featured in 3 major design magazines and marking his firm as a major presence in the city. The Milan client just arrived, his assistant said, approaching him. And the mayor's office confirmed they'll be at tonight's reception. Russell gave a small nod and adjusted his tie, standing in front of wide windows that offered a panoramic view of the skyline. At 44, he was no longer the man he had been in Boston, his temples streaked with gray, his frame lean from daily rowing on Lake Michigan, his bearing confident and assured. The past year and a half had changed him. The firm had landed major contracts in Chicago, New York, and overseas. More importantly, he had assembled a team who shared his vision, innovative, thoughtful, and committed to sustainable design. Russell's living space, perched atop the building, had garnered praise for its inventive reuse of a historic landmark. By all external measures, he had rebuilt his life with remarkable finesse. And yet, something essential continued to slip through his fingers. As he greeted a visiting client from Milan, his phone vibrated with a message from Scott. Just landed at O'Hare, hitting the hotel first, then heading over. Should be there by 3. Russell's face brightened. The timing was ideal. Scott would arrive in time for the evening's reception and remain through the weekend. It would be the first real stretch of time they'd spent together in ages. The rest of the day swept by in a fast-forward sequence of meetings, press interviews, and final run-throughs for the event. At precisely 3, his assistant appeared at the doorway. "Your brother's here," she said, hesitating. "And he brought someone along." Russell barely had time to react before Scott walked in, Meredith Klein following close behind. For an instant, Russell froze. Then he quickly recovered. "Meredith, this is unexpected. Blame your brother," she said with a familiar directness that hadn't dulled since their brief past encounters. "He somehow convinced me that Chicago in January was worth the trip." "I told her about the launch," Scott chimed in, completely unapologetic. "She said she'd never seen your work in person. One thing led to another." Russell threw Scott a glance that made it clear there'd be a reckoning later. Then, turning to Meredith, he offered, "Since you're here, want the tour?" "I'd love to," she replied, already scanning the lofty ceilings and weathered brick. "This place is gorgeous." As Russell guided them through the space, he found himself seeing it through Meredith's eyes. Her thoughtful questions made him notice details he often overlooked. His ex, Natalie, had focused mostly on appearances, how a room played to its audience. Meredith, by contrast, was interested in the ideas and craftsmanship behind each feature. "This staircase is amazing," she said, running her fingers along the sleek railing. "It looks like it's floating. How is it holding up with no visible supports?" He walked her through the structural concept, impressed by how quickly she understood. I started out in engineering, she explained, catching his reaction. Eventually moved into graphic design, but structural math was always my not-so-secret obsession. By the time they reached the upper level where Russell lived, Scott excused himself, claiming a work call and slipping away. Your brother isn't much for subtlety, Meredith said with a knowing smile. Subtle has never been his strong suit, Russell agreed, surprised at how easy the exchange felt. Can I get you something? Coffee? A glass of wine? Coffee sounds perfect, she said, still on Boston time. In the minimalist kitchen, accented with warm wood and clean lines, Russell began making coffee while Meredith studied the framed sketches lining the wall. These are beautiful, she said, stopping at a conceptual drawing for an eco-friendly housing development. Not what I expected from your commercial work. It's more of a passion project, he explained, handing her the cup. Something I've been working on quietly. You should build it, she said without pause. It's visionary and practical. Her enthusiasm prompted him to open up, walking her through the idea, a sustainable, mixed-income neighborhood with cutting-edge green infrastructure. As they talked, he realized how long it had been since he'd had a conversation this candid, free from pretense or strategic filters. I should probably ask, he said after a moment. How much has Scott told you about what happened in Boston? Her expression dimmed. Enough. Don't forget. I had my own version of that story. Teddy was my husband after all. Ex-husband, Russell corrected automatically. Very ex, she confirmed dryly. Last I heard, he's somewhere in Florida doing cosmetic work under a new name. Apparently, budget Botox is in high demand. Russell laughed. You don't sound bitter. I was, she admitted, for a while. But bitterness is like trying to build on contaminated soil. Nothing healthy grows from it. The analogy hit him hard. He'd spent months designing this space as a launch pad for his future, all while neglecting the emotional wreckage beneath it. I should probably start getting ready for tonight, he said, checking the time. Will I see you there? If the invitation still stands, she said, smiling. I came prepared. Scott warned me to pack a dress. It's sound, Russell assured her, his tone firm. After Meredith and Scott departed to prepare at their hotel, Russell remained behind, her parting words circling in his head. Was his new beginning laid atop something irreparably tainted? The success of Web Design Group, the acclaim his latest project had garnered, his rising prominence in Chicago, were they all constructed over the debris of a broken marriage and the residue of retribution? That night, the reception surpassed every expectation. The grand hall pulsed with life as architects, corporate leaders, and city dignitaries mingled, admiring the space and offering Russell heartfelt congratulations for his firm's achievements. The mayor gave a brief but heartfelt speech, applauding Web Design Group's influence on the city's changing architectural landscape. Yet even amidst the praise, Russell found his gaze repeatedly drawn to Meredith. She wore a modest navy dress, her presence subtle but magnetic. Her attentiveness to the discussions around her felt authentic. Unlike Natalie, who had once treated such events as scripted performances, mastering the role of the supportive spouse, Meredith was clearly invested, listening with genuine interest and curiosity. As the evening tapered off and the crowd thinned, Russell's assistant quietly approached him. You had a call earlier, she whispered. From Boston, Natalie Montgomery. She wanted to let you know her mother died yesterday. Beverly. The name made Russell pause. Beverly, the imposing matriarch of the Montgomery family, a woman who had crafted their social image with precision, now gone. First Philip, now Beverly, he murmured. His assistant added gently, She didn't ask you to call back, just said you should know. He gave a quiet nod of acknowledgement. Across the room, he caught Meredith watching him, her expression thoughtful and perceptive. He crossed the space between them. Something happened? She asked, intuiting a shift in his demeanor. My former mother-in-law passed away, he said. Likely her heart. I'm sorry, she said softly, and meant it. You must feel a lot of things. Strangely, I don't, he admitted after a beat. I thought I might. Relief, maybe. Some sense of closure. But instead, she asked gently. Just nothing, he said. Only this strange emptiness. That's what vengeance does, Meredith said, her voice low. It offers you the illusion of justice. But when it's over, there's just this hollow space. He studied her face, struck by the calm clarity in her words. Sounds like you know what that feels like. My payback on Teddy wasn't theatrical, she replied. But it was intentional. I told everyone in our circle exactly what he'd done. I didn't hold back, ruined his reputation back in Boston. And when it was done, all I felt was nothing. Around them, the last of the reception was winding down. Staff moved quietly, clearing dishes and glasses. From across the room, Scott checked his watch, flashed Russell a thumbs up, and slipped out unnoticed. Need a breath of fresh air? Russell asked impulsively. There's a rooftop terrace. Great view, if you can handle the cold. Meredith nodded, and within minutes the two were wrapped in coats, standing atop the building, gazing over the glittering Chicago skyline. The January air was biting, but the sky was sharp and clear, stars twinkling faintly even through the city's glow. I haven't told anyone this, Russell said abruptly, but I've been considering reaching out to Natalie. Not to rekindle anything, he added quickly at Meredith's raised eyebrow, but just to find some sense of resolution. What would you say to her? Meredith asked, her breath fogging in the cold. He was quiet for a moment, then said, that I finally get it. Revenge doesn't heal anything, and no matter what happened, I hope she can find peace. Would you mean that? She asked, not with skepticism, but a soft, earnest curiosity. I think I would, he said slowly. Not for her sake, for mine. Carrying this resentment, it's wearing me down. They stood silently for a while, the city sprawling out beneath them. Russell felt something loosen inside, a tension beginning to release. It wasn't quite forgiveness, but it felt like the beginning of letting go, a decision not to let betrayal define his future. I'm glad Scott brought you tonight, he said eventually, even if his matchmaking strategy wasn't exactly subtle. Meredith laughed, her voice warm despite the cold. Same here, though I should be honest, I'm not looking for anything serious. I'm still figuring out who I am now that I'm no longer Teddy Klein's ex-wife. I get it, Russell said. I'm still figuring out who I am when I'm not just the guy who orchestrated the perfect revenge. Maybe, she said, turning toward him, we could figure it out together, as friends. I'd like that, he replied. And somewhere deep inside, something long dormant began to stir. Not love, not yet, but hope, quiet and real. This time, there was a quiet certainty in what he was creating. It wasn't just ambition or a need to prove himself. As Russell stepped back inside from the terrace, he took in the sight of his new building with renewed perspective. It wasn't just a symbol of his professional resurgence. It felt like the foundation of something more personal, a chance to reconstruct the parts of his life that had long been neglected. Perhaps here, in this space, he could finally shape a future not anchored in past wounds, but in open possibilities. Almost 3 years had slipped by since the divorce when Russell found himself standing at the entrance of Oak Grove Cemetery in Boston, a modest cluster of white lilies cradled in his hand. The air was brisk but bright, spring creeping in and gently nudging winter out of the city. He hadn't planned on visiting the Montgomery graves during this short business trip, but something unspoken had drawn him there, a quiet impulse for resolution, or maybe just a need to acknowledge how far he had come. He moved slowly through the rows of stone until he stood before the large marker engraved with Montgomery. Someone had already left fresh flowers at the grave where the new inscriptions read, Philip and Beverly. Russell added his own bouquet to the rest, standing in stillness. He wasn't praying, he was remembering. They had been a part of his life for over 10 years, complicated, often corrosive figures. Philip's hypocrisy, Beverly's veiled manipulations, none of it brought comfort in retrospect. Their deaths didn't feel like justice, only a soft reminder of time's erosion and how bitterness, when clung to, erodes as well, leaving little behind. A voice broke the quiet. "I thought that might be you." He turned. Natalie was standing a short distance away, dressed simply in jeans and a light coat. She looked different, her hair shorter, her features sharper, and a quiet weariness behind her eyes he hadn't seen before. "Natalie," he said, nodding slightly. "I'm here for meetings." "I figured I should come by to say goodbye," she said as she approached, stopping just short of him. "Thanks for the flowers." "I didn't expect that." There was a pause, a tension not unfamiliar to them, born of everything left unsaid and everything they once shared. "How's life in Chicago?" she asked eventually. "It's going well," he answered. "The firm's growing. We just secured the Performing Arts Center project." "I read about that in a design magazine," she said. "It looked incredible. Congratulations." This pause felt less heavy than the last. "And you?" he asked. "How are things?" She gave a small shrug. "Taking it day by day. Still working at my uncle's dental office. I've started night classes, dental hygiene certification." He nodded. He hadn't expected to feel pity or vindication, and surprisingly, he didn't. What he felt instead was a quiet admiration for the effort she was making, for her willingness to move forward. "I never really said it properly," she said, her voice quieter now. "I told you I was sorry back then, but I don't think I ever truly owned any of it." He shifted uncomfortably. "You don't have to." "I do," she interrupted gently. "I betrayed you completely, not just with Teddy, but in more subtle ways, over time. I let my parents' expectations shape my choices, and I ignored who I was supposed to be." Her candor caught him off guard. This wasn't the deflective version of Natalie he had known, the one who dodged responsibility. "What happened to Teddy?" he asked, the curiosity genuine. "Florida," she replied with a bitter half-smile. "He's reinvented himself as some kind of cosmetic doctor for rich women. Left me with 20 grand in debt and wasted 3 years of my life." Russell couldn't help the faint smile that tugged at his mouth, despite everything. "Well, at least you saw him for who he really was." "Too late," she said. "But yes." They stood quietly, side by side, the early spring wind whispering through the tender leaves above them. The silence between them had shifted. It no longer carried the weight of resentment. "I heard you're with someone now," Natalie said after a moment. "Meredith Klein? Scott mentioned it when I ran into him." Russell nodded, unable to hide the small, warm smile her name brought. "We've been together for a couple of years. She moved to Chicago last year. Her design business is doing really well." "I'm glad," Natalie said sincerely. "Scott said she's wonderful." "She is," Russell said. "She's different from anyone I've known." The implication lingered in the air, understood by both. But there was no regret in it, only recognition of contrast. "Do you think you'll get married again?" she asked. He thought about it. "Maybe. We're not rushing anything. I want to build something real this time." She gave a small nod. She understood. It was the language they once shared, metaphor as blueprint. "I should get going," he said, glancing at his watch. "Flight leaves at 2. "Of course," she replied softly. "Thanks for coming." There was a quiet dignity in standing at his parents' final resting place without the shadow of resentment clinging to him. The fury that once scorched his soul had long been extinguished. Time had worn it down until there was no fuel left to keep it burning. As he turned to walk away, A familiar voice broke the stillness. "Russell?" He turned to see Natalie. "I hope you find lasting joy, the kind that doesn't fade," she said gently. "You've always deserved that." Her words echoed an old memory, a fragment from a tumultuous phone call back when she was still caught in the grip of addiction. But today, there was no edge to her tone, no desperation, just genuine warmth. "I think I have," Russell replied, his voice steady. "And I hope the same for you, Natalie." As he pulled away from the cemetery, a sense of release washed over him, lighter than he'd felt in ages. The obsession with retribution that had once controlled his every move now felt like a ghost from another life. It no longer held power over him. His phone vibrated with a message from Meredith. "Meeting wrapped early. Found the most amazing vintage blueprints at that place I mentioned. Can't wait to hang them in your office. Love you." He grinned, sent off a quick text in response, and merged onto the highway, headed for the airport. At last, the past had lost its grip. 2 mornings later, in his penthouse overlooking Chicago, Russell adjusted his tie in the window's reflection. The early sun danced across the expanse of Lake Michigan, stretching out like a sea made just for him. Meredith appeared behind him, radiant in a tailored emerald dress. "You're overanalyzing," she teased, stepping closer to straighten a tie that needed no fixing. "They may not be critics, but they control the purse strings for the green housing project," he reminded her. 2 years of work rides on this pitch. "And you're going to nail it," she replied with easy confidence. "Because this project is smart, necessary, and entirely yours." Looking at her, Russell was struck by the strength of what they had, a relationship built on truth, respect, and autonomy, so unlike the fragile bond he'd once shared with Natalie. "How was the trip to Boston?" Meredith asked, fresh off a return from New York. "More meaningful than I expected," he admitted. "I visited my parents' graves." Her eyebrows rose slightly. "Closure?" "Something close," he said with a nod. "Natalie was there." She studied his face. "And how was that?" "Strangely okay," he replied. "She's not the same." "Maybe you aren't either," Meredith offered. "Probably true," he said. "Did seeing her change anything?" "It confirmed something," he said, the truth settling in. "That part of my life is genuinely over, not just in my thoughts, but in my heart." Meredith smiled and kissed him softly. "Good. Now it's time to focus forward. On the next chapter, the one where you revolutionize housing and give me even more reason to admire you." Russell laughed, full of gratitude. "Have I told you today that I love you?" "You have," she said, grinning. "But say it again anyway." An hour later, Russell stood before a room of potential investors, presenting his sustainable housing concept. He spoke of design, eco-impact, community integration, each point reflecting months of dedication and care. For the first time in years, he wasn't driven by revenge or the need to prove his worth. He was simply building something that mattered. Architecture with heart, a legacy with meaning. During a short break, he stepped out onto a terrace to breathe. The city sprawled out below him, a living symbol of his fresh start. His phone buzzed with a message from Scott. "Just heard Natalie's getting married, to that dentist she works for. Figured you'd want to hear it from me before the gossip kicks in." "You good?" Russell smiled to himself and typed back quickly. "Totally good. I hope she finds real happiness." And he meant it with all sincerity. The man who once dreamed of elaborate payback had evolved into someone who could genuinely wish peace upon those who had hurt him. That change didn't come cheaply. It was earned, over time, through real healing. Inside, Meredith waited with the investors. As Russell resumed his pitch, her presence anchored him. He caught her eye and saw steady encouragement in her gaze. Gratitude flooded him, not just for her, but for the life they were shaping together. A life built not on ruins, but on purpose and strength. That evening, they strolled side by side along the Lake Michigan shoreline. Meredith slipped her arm through his with quiet affection. "From that smile, I'm guessing they approved," she said. "Unanimously," Russell confirmed. "Groundbreaking starts next month." "I never doubted it," she said, her eyes sparkling. "This means too much to let it slip away." Russell stopped in his tracks and turned to look her in the eyes. "Come live with me, for good this time. Let's stop pretending we need two separate homes." Meredith studied his face. "You're certain? You won't regret losing your solitude, your own place to breathe?" "I'm completely certain," he said, his voice firm. "I've outgrown the need for that. What I need now is you." They continued walking, their conversation shifting toward the practicalities of blending their lives. But as they spoke, Russell's mind drifted. He quietly revisited the road that had brought him here, the devastating loss, the meticulous revenge he had pursued, the hollow victory it brought, and the long, grueling journey toward wholeness. What he had reconstructed wasn't just a home or a livelihood, it was his entire self. The part of him that had always been an architect knew this truth intimately. Real strength is born only after total collapse. You can't build something lasting on top of broken foundations. The past, riddled with betrayal and resentment, needed to be demolished completely before anything meaningful could take its place. His retribution against the Montgomerys hadn't fixed him. It had simply cleared the debris. The actual healing had come later, through truth told without armor, small gestures of trust, and slow, steady days of effort. Russell Webb, once eaten alive by grief and fixated on revenge, had finally created his greatest design, not in steel or glass, but in a new way of living, one rooted in grace, driven by clarity, and open again to love without caution. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. And even more than that, it was strong. Unlike the cold perfection of vengeance, this life he was choosing now offered something much rarer: peace. Our story has come to an end. What do you think about this story? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoyed the way I tell stories, head over to my channel and check out my other videos. May the force be with you. See you soon, my friend.